So the grand sequel to the worst year ever is now over. The magical 12 months, where the world had put to rest all the horrible things from 2020, and we entered into a modern golden age where all of our dreams would come true. Except not really. Yeah, quite a few bad things happened last year, but at the very least it wasn't a marathon of pain like the year before it. On the personal side of things, I was actually able to get control over my life for a little bit, and I was able to do that whole YouTube thing with some level of consistency. I also played a bunch of video games last year, so let's talk about them. Like with the videos that I've been making annually, I'll be talking about a mix of games from the previous year and several years prior, along with early access titles and DLCs. So not everything mentioned here was released in 2021, but most of them will be worth your time. Consider giving them a look while we all wait for Breath of the Wild 2 or Silksong or the like. Also, while you're watching, consider doing the thing with the buttons underneath the video, and commenting, and sharing it around. I'd really appreciate that. And with all that said, I hope you enjoy. So to start off a video discussing the golden era of 2021, let's talk about disappointment. The Binding of Isaac is a great game that for the longest time I've held up as one of my personal favorite roguelites. Over time, my opinion has shifted due to a mild feeling of burnout. I hope the latest DLC, Repentance, would reignite my interest in the game, and it accomplished this. For about a month, and then I burnt out again. Whoops. Let me clarify that this expansion isn't bad. In fact, I like the majority of the content that was added in. The alternate stages, with the exclusive content that can only be found on these routes, add a ton of replay value to casual runs. The anti-birth item pool and all the tweaks made to synergies are something that I appreciate. The 2, technically 3, new characters are a nice addition, along with the 17 alternate versions of the playable characters really makes this feel like a sequel being sold as DLC. Hell, just the sheer amount of content alone made Repentance worth the price of admission. So why am I disappointed? While the attempts to rebalance the game is welcome, I feel like the heavy changes to higher tier items were excessive, to say the least. Stronger items like Brimstone deal less damage now, but it's also buried in a pool with too many bad items, so it just feels like overkill. Shops have a random chance of being completely worthless, so I end up wasting a key in the process, and I swear there is something wrong with the item RNG in this game. Like, I haven't seen my favorite items, like Tech X, after buying the DLC. I have to double check if it's still in the game or not. Now, just to clarify, I'm not accounting for the massive patch that was rolled out a while ago, which took like 90 years to install, so there's a chance that I'll pick this game up again and my experience will be more positive. But until then, meh. I noticed that quite a few indie games are trying to make a short but memorable experience. Well, I guess that everyone agreed that Portal was brilliant, so why not try to capitalize on that market? And I ended up playing 2 of these fleeting encounters last year, with different outcomes. A Short Hike feels like a collectathon platformer, which was condensed into a brief stroll, and it was a fine experience overall. The other game was Sayonara Wild Heart, and this was an experience that stuck with me. Sayonara Wild Heart is a simple rhythm game with the setup of a playable music video. The gameplay is primarily about flying through the stage and collecting hearts while vibing to the music. It's fairly simplistic, though the reason I ended up liking this game is the amount of variety with each stage. One has you riding on a motorcycle while shooting wolves, one has the collectibles and hazards blinking in and out of existence, one has you dodging hazards in some guy's VR headset, and one is just a third-person shooter. The game is super simple with what you're doing, but how you actually accomplish this goal changes so often that it's hard to lose interest. What helps is the game's vibrant color palette and its solid soundtrack. These were enough to keep me engaged till the very end. So yeah, this game won't last for hundreds of hours, but it is something I can see myself picking back up again, which for an experience like this is a little more important. The Mario RPGs are not in the best place as of now, what with Alpha Dream being dead in the water, and the current Paper Mario devs sticking to their guns with making these pseudo-adventure games with literal turn-based combat. It's clear that no one in the creative seat wants to make a Mario RPG like the older ones, so maybe someone else should do it. And for the sake of everyone who hasn't even touched any of these games, I'll be cutting the comparisons here. Bug Fables is a simple but fun turn-based RPG with the added spice of using timed button presses for attacking and blocking. You get 3 party members for the journey. Kabu, a by-the-books beetle who is also a massive nerd, V, a loudmouth bee with eyes on the prize, and Leaf, a stoic moth whose love of cute things breaks through their blunt nature. These characters are put on a quest to find the everlasting Sapling, a journey that will take them all over the land of Bulgaria and experience all the oddities of this strange land. The actual bug theming goes beyond the aesthetic, as the world building is pretty solid. It justifies things like why some bugs are intelligent while others are feral, or why there are drastically different biomes right next to each other. The battle system is pretty fun. Fights are simple enough that they aren't overwhelming, but there's also enough depth to make the customization matter, with bonus points going to the hard mode medal that I use for the majority of my playthrough. Yeah, this isn't a game that's overflowing with original concepts, hell, the bug theming isn't even all that new, but the game as a whole is a Fable worth experiencing. I think it's safe to say that we're living in a parody world at this point. Half the time I'm looking at a news article and I have to double check that I'm not reading something from The Onion. Case in point, I made a video on a game making fun of corporate cruelty, and then sometime later, Amazon's negligence led to an employee dying on the job. Seriously though, the employees over there need to unionize. Anyhow. For those who aren't in the know, I made a review on this game last year, and it was a good old time. Maybe you can watch it later and see why the other camp of people in my audience who watch it are just noticeably more attractive. And since the review exists, I'll be keeping things brief. You play as Brian Pasternak, an average everyman who is hired to deal with the most horrifying thing that you can find in a contemporary setting: capitalism. Oh, and the monsters, those are a bit of a problem. Brian has to go through this strange company in order to get rid of the witch causing all the supernatural events that are happening all throughout the company. With a unique setting, fun survival elements, solid soundtrack, and surprisingly effective scares throughout, Yuppie Psycho was a unique horror game that was a good find in the ocean of indie horror games. Pretty please watch my review, I worked really hard on it. With the beginning of 2021 on the horizon and fresh memories of what happened 12 months ago, I was skimming through my backlog to find something to play, and I found Dishonored in my backlog, a game that I couldn't get into initially. However, a change in the current climate made some parts of the game click for me. I don't know, something about a game where you go after the most corrupt people in the country who are just raking in the wealth while the regular folk are dying on the streets was something that I wanted to play at that moment. Arcane Studios has been on a roll with their most recent games. Prey was a top-tier System Shock clone that shot up as one of my personal favorite games ever made, and I've heard plenty of great things about their recent title Deathloop. So let's look back at this studio and see where it all began. So let's look back at the Arcane game that people actually care about. Dishonored is a stealth game with a similar style to Thief the Dark Project, with a big difference being the shift in protagonist from a thief to an assassin. Playing as Corvo Otano, who was falsely charged with the murder of the Queen, you're put on a quest to take down 5 corrupt figureheads and take back the kingdom. The game is broken up into 8 missions in large explorable levels, each of which have several nooks and crannies to find secrets, bits of lore, and collectibles. Or you could just skip the majority of the level and go after the target immediately. Yeah, the beauty of this game is the number of ways that you can go through the level and complete the mission. How to complete these missions is also interesting, as you get a decent set of tools to take out the enemies, but you also get in contact with the Outsider, who gives you supernatural powers that add a new dimension to these levels. And hell, how you get through these levels can either go down a violent route, escalating the city's problems by causing more chaos, or you can keep the death count low to save the city and get a better ending. This also applies to the targets themselves, who can either die in a variety of ways, or get dealt with in a non-lethal way that's more of a fate worse than death. Oh, and the game comes with all the DLC, which adds in a second campaign's worth of content with a pretty good story to boot. I'm definitely looking forward to playing more of the sequels this year. Nintendo is such a strange company when it comes to re-releasing their older titles. Half the time they don't even bother, regardless of fan requests, and even when they do bother, they end up cutting corners. I mean, look at Mario 3D All-Stars, a compilation of all the 3D Mario games that impacted the plumber's legacy. Except for these ones. On top of the noticeable shortcomings, Nintendo had to be asked to do crazy things like make Mario Sunshine compatible with the GameCube controller. The controller that the game was originally built around, mind you. Seriously, all this absolute nonsense nonsense makes Mario 3D World's port to the Switch more of a bizarre surprise. I never bothered playing Mario 3D World on the Wii U. Nothing in the trailers or the reviews at the time convinced me that this wasn't just a console version of 3D Land, so I passed on it. Years later, I saw the trailer for the Switch port, and it was pretty much what I expected. However, the colossal Bowser in the room stood out for the right reasons. The core gameplay of 3D World is relatively the same as the original version, with some notable quality of life changes. Apparently this version has faster movement, and all the Wii U controller gimmicks were either axed or reworked drastically. So getting to play the best version of this game allowed me to see why everyone loves it so much. While yes, this feels like 3D Land, it's clear that the developers learned from the mistakes of that game and its rather repetitive levels. Now in 3D World, the level variety is through the roof. Hell, just going off the top of my head, there's a level where you're running on a Mario Kart track, one where you have to avoid the spotlights, one where you swing around on trapeze, one with an invisible platform that you have to ground pound on, and one where you're collecting green stars in a marathon of mini challenges. Even when stages use similar ideas, there are just enough changes added in to make them feel like a fresh new level, and that's really cool. The second half of this package is the content that I was really looking forward to playing, Bowser's Fury, which looked like a hybrid of 3D World and Mario Odyssey, and while I was a little skeptical, I ended up liking this combination. The mode has Mario and Bowser Jr. travel across Lake Lapcat to collect cat shines. Sounds pretty basic, but every few minutes, Bowser wakes up from his sleep and starts hunting Mario down, with the weird power that he absorbed having an effect on the land around him. Hell, some of the shines are actually inaccessible without the big guy around, and the ticking time element makes getting all the shines a blast. If this is a proof of concept for the next Mario game, then honestly, I have plenty to look forward to. Castlevania, a name that I'm rather sad to say is basically a dead franchise at this point. Outside of re-releases, Konami doesn't want to do anything with this IP, and seeing what they did to both Metal Gear and Contra, I think that's a blessing in disguise. Though the existence of spiritual successors fill me with some hope though, since so many old games and genres were left behind in favor of trend chasing. And with the bar for making an independent game being lowered in the last few years, the OG Castlevania devs went on to make the game that the AAA industry didn't want to make, and it is so damn good. As a fan of the Igavania games, playing through Bloodstained was a treat. Everything that made those games fun is here and accounted for. The combat and movement are as fast and fluid as ever, the castle has the appeal of going from this daunting challenge to explore to a fun series of areas to blitz through when you get the overpowered abilities later in the game. Like its unofficial siblings, Bloodstained has a wide variety of areas, despite being limited to a single castle. The customization is as deep as the ocean, with a laundry list of weapons that warrant multiple playthroughs to get the most out of them, and shards are functionally similar to glyphs from Order of Ecclesia, and just the sheer amount of them makes killing enemies an extra special reward, especially when some of these can be upgraded. And the soundtrack! Holy hot damn, Michiru Yamane went above and beyond for this OST. I'll be listening to this stuff for years. The story is nothing I haven't already seen before from the Igavania games, with the VAs being its saving grace, and that's sort of a nice segue into my only issue with the game. And that's the fact that there aren't that many original ideas here. This game is more of a greatest hits collection for the series that it's succeeding from, and for some people, that makes this a perfect entry point for this type of Metroidvania game. Yeah, that's fine. I just hope there's a sequel to Ritual of the Night, since the idea of a game of this quality with a wealth of new ideas is something I'll definitely get hyped for. Boomer shooters is a subgenre that I haven't really played much of. I guess the closest thing I have to that type of experience was Doom All Caps and Doom Eternal, but those are just modern shooters that borrowed a couple ideas from the past. They didn't really try to recreate the older shooters on a foundational level, so naturally, I got curious. And I found a game that everyone kept saying was Doom Eternal on a budget, so I gave it a shot. I knew I was in for something good. Now, full disclosure, this game isn't finished yet, but my counter to anyone who takes issue with that is that any game with a grappling hook in it is worth taking time to talk about, in any context. ULTRAKILL is a game where you play as a machine killing demons from hell. I think there's more to the plot, but odds are it's written on a post-it note somewhere, and I really could not be asked to read that shit because holy hot damn, this combat is amazing. It's fast, it's cathartic, it's fast, the weapons are punchy, it's really fast, it's bloody as hell, it's... a little too fast. But in a good way, since it's a challenging game with a skill ceiling as high as the sky. I guess I'll be testing how high I can make it towards that skill ceiling, since the game lets me take all the unlocked weapons back to older levels that are filled to the brim with secrets to find. And, well, I think my only problem with the game is the mechanic to heal being a little too inconvenient to use consistently, but I could also just get better at the game. That's also an option. The latest update added a grappling hook along with some ridiculous power-ups, so I'm looking forward to what's coming next. This might be in early access, but it was more than worth the time I spent on it. Okay, Toby, I'm invested now. Oh yeah, by the way, this video has footage from both chapters of Deltarune. If somehow you haven't played the game, haven't been spoiled on all the story bits, and you want to experience the game fresh, then skip ahead to the next part. Both chapters are free, so there's nothing to lose but your time. Anyhow... The unofficial sequel to Undertale was definitely an experience. The first chapter was dropped on the community out of nowhere, and it blew up. Though with the caveat that because this was the first chapter, there wasn't really much to sink our teeth into when it comes to the story and lore. Though it did give us one of the best fictional characters in recent memory, so I guess it all balanced out. Chapter 2 had noticeably more fanfare, and I'm actually invested in what's coming up in the future. The new chapter takes place in the internet-inspired location of Cyber City, and all the changes that come with it. It's noticeably more visually appealing, and the music for this chapter alone makes the time spent with this chapter feel worthwhile. The composer for Celeste joined in, and man, every theme in this game is such a bop. The battle system is just as compelling as ever, with the additional percentage bar for sparing enemies. Speaking about that, the enemies are just as fun as they've ever been, and the boss fights are actually top tier stuff. I don't even think there's a single weak one throughout the chapter. The main antagonist for this chapter, Queen, is a massive step up from the first chapter. She's goofy in most of her scenes, but when the moment is right, she can be a genuinely tough opponent to fight against. There's a lot to like here, especially with all the secrets in the chapter, which also includes a radically different route hidden in the game. With the bits of lore revealed near the end of the chapter giving an actual legitimate connection between Deltarune and Undertale, and that cliffhanger of an ending, I have a lot to look forward to in Chapter 3. Here's hoping that Toby can keep things interesting. Sucker Punch has cemented itself as one of my favorite development teams of all time. Every single game from the past 3 generations of Sony consoles have been a masterclass in what they've set out to achieve, and Ghost of Tsushima is no different. On the surface, Ghost of Tsushima is ticking a lot of boxes from the open world genre. It's not unfair to argue that most of what's on offer here hasn't already been done by Breath of the Wild, all of Ubisoft, or other Sony properties. But here's the thing, when your game is one of the best in its genre, then a little unoriginality can be forgiven, especially since its strengths make the experience worthwhile. Combat, specifically on hard mode, was a treat, with the 4 stances and the growing arsenal of items made every combat encounter a fun fight. The map, thankfully, doesn't have the Ubisoft problem of having content vomit all over the place. Instead, it has a fog of war that encourages you to travel and explore and find things on your own. Enemy camps are here, but even when going through them, if one of the enemies notices you, it's possible to take them out before they alert the entire camp. And clearing them out actually is encouraged, since they help clear out the fog of war on the map. NPCs move at your speed instead of the other way around, you can call your horse from anywhere in the game world, and the UI is kept to a tasteful minimum, with it even being possible to remove even more of it for immersion. All of this isn't to overshadow the few original features that it has, like the ability to strike down enemies before a fight, or the one-on-one battles, which are a ton of fun. The story is masterfully told, with the conflict to take back Tsushima from Khotun Khan and the Mongols being a compelling tale from beginning to end. Even the side quests with the important characters were worth it, even if they just had the same gameplay loop as the main story. My only issue is that I played the game with the wrong mindset, since I tried to consume the majority of the content on my first playthrough, and that included the filler side quests, which was not a good idea. A word to the wise, save that shit for the post-game. Aside from that, this was definitely the swan song for the PS4, and whatever Sucker Punch has in store for the PS5, I'm expecting greatness. Throughout the year, I played through many genres that I was familiar with, but I also dipped my toe into 2 genres that were completely foreign to me. City builders were a thing that I always knew about, but I never really took much interest, since the management aspect seemed more like work than play. Well, I guess hell froze over because Frostpunk was a really good time. 11-Bit Studios are the people behind This War of Mine, a game characterized by good people being forced to do terrible things due to horrible circumstances outside of their control. So naturally, their next game involves colonies of humans surviving in a frozen apocalypse with even more ambiguity to muddy the waters. In Frostpunk, you become the leader of a city in a frozen wasteland that starts off painfully cold and only gets worse with the passage of time. While you contemplate why you took this job in the first place, you'll have to deal with managing resources and the struggle of keeping things under control. You'll need coal to feed the generator so you don't freeze to death, wood and steel for building structures, and raw food to make rations. There's a constant struggle to keep resources coming in, but then you'll need to research new technology to make the city run more efficiently in the ever-growing struggle to not freeze to death. Though the part that makes Frostpunk what it is, besides the punishing difficulty, is the laws that you can pass in the game. One side has you pass benevolent laws that improve the day-to-day lives of your people, or you can throw away all forms of compassion so everyone can survive. In other words, you can treat your citizens like humans or like numbers in a video game. The other sides of the law involves the reintroduction of religion or a local police force. Things start off normal and even reasonable. However, the further you push the state's power over the people, the closer you turn the city into a dictatorship. The worst part is that being a good person in this game is legitimately difficult, with the mechanical benefits of being an absolute scumbag. It opens up the question of what's more important to you, your morals or not freezing to death in the cold. Regardless of the conclusion, the path to getting there is always compelling. Another genre that I never thought I'd get into is automation. Games built around the idea of using machines to craft items on a massive scale. Factorio is the most popular example online, but something about it seemed unappealing to me. Maybe it was the color palette. Satisfactory, however, really stood out for the right reasons. You play as a nameless employee working in the space equivalent to Amazon, where you're dropped onto a planet and asked to find resources and craft them into useful items. The automation in this game comes from the fact that, yeah, you can craft a lot of the items by hand, but it's basically a joke when you have to make the more complicated items in such a massive quantity. So the goal is to mine resources and build factories to process ores into useful items, which will then lead you to expand further and further across the game world, with the major goal to find more exotic materials to build more advanced technology. And building machines and getting them to run efficiently is a rewarding endeavor, and it's even relaxing with the general chill atmosphere of the planet, vicious animals notwithstanding. While I made it pretty far in the tech tree and unlocked some pretty cool stuff, the alien artifacts hint that there will be some really cool stuff to make down the line, and I'm definitely looking forward to that. I bought this game for its current full price, and I've gotten more than my money's worth. Oh boy, after a long-ass time of waiting for the brand new game in the Shin Megami Tensei series, we can say that SMT5 is finally out, and we can finally stop making jokes about it being dead. So let's see what the reception is.
What's missing from the Persona formula here is a lot of its heart.
Well, at least we got something new to make fun of now. The wait for SMT5 was, to put it lightly, absolutely brutal. This game was announced before the console it was going to debut on was even released, and then we got more news about Persona spin-offs and re-releases than any news on the latest SMT game, only for it to finally leave its development hell, and boy was it worth the wait. This game plays like a dream come true. The combat is just as tight as the previous mainline games on the 3DS, with several new additions to make this one of the better entries in the series. The press turn system is here, and just as fun as it's always been to exploit enemy weaknesses for more turns, the caveat is that enemies can do the same thing to you, so all the battles have tension, and it's super rewarding to get past most enemy encounters and bosses. The new addition is the Makatsushi Gate, which lets your whole team do critical damage for one turn, or can activate a powerful special move, and thankfully it's not too unbalanced since the enemies can also use the same ability. The overworld is a ton of fun to run around, with level design that really reminds me of Xenoblade Chronicles, with plenty of secrets to find and the occasional strong enemy in the area. The combat and world exploration are top tier stuff, which is why it's a bit sad to say that the story is rather weak. What's worse is that most of the early plot points were recycled from SMT4, so to get more than a third through the game and not really be hooked by the story is a little disappointing. But none of that can take away the sheer enjoyment I had while battling, exploring, side questing, and demon fusing. So I'm willing to give that part of the game a pass since the gameplay carries this title so hard. Hopefully there's some equivalent to an SMT5 apocalypse in the future to rectify the few flaws this gem has, because there's a lot to like here. When it comes to enjoying anything from Nintendo, there's no greater struggle than being a Metroid fan. The series was constantly struggling to appeal to a wider audience with its less stylized aesthetic, emphasis on first-person shooting in the Prime trilogy, and the main gimmick of the series being the feeling of getting lost when other Nintendo franchises were noticeably more linear. Getting the appeal of Metroid is hard unless you actually played it, with the gap in releases and further mishandling of the series wasn't really helping. Somehow, after all that, a miracle happened, and we got a game that was just a rumor for the better part of a decade. The long-lost follow-up to Metroid Fusion has Samus Aran travel to the planet ZDR to find and eliminate the last X-parasite in the universe. She then loses all of her power-ups immediately after bumping into the first guy on the planet. Man, it is good to be back. It's almost surreal to play a new Metroid game with the fidelity of the Switch. The environments are drop-dead gorgeous, with every background having some interesting detail to look at. The game plays beautifully, with the movement of Samus Returns getting all of the rough edges smoothened out, so the action moves at a faster pace. Speaking of the previous game, what surprises me about Dread compared to Samus Returns is the amount of confidence shown by the dev team. The power-ups are still the basic ones that have been in every Metroid game up to that point, but the order has been mixed up dramatically, showing that this game is far from following the motions. The amount of time between starting up the game and getting the Morph Ball so you can get the most out of the new slide ability is low-key brilliant. The new items here are great though. The Storm Missiles are a must-keep for future games, with the Aeon Dash not being far behind. And then there's the main gameplay edition of the Emmys, large flexible machines programmed to hunt Samus down, and are damn near indestructible. Eventually taking these bastards down is a monumental achievement, especially since they're armed with some of the better abilities in the game. Moving over to boss fights, the majority of them are pretty solid, despite the odd difficulty spike in the middle. Though the final boss, that is some A+ stuff. Even after my playthrough was over, I still feel like there's more to do in a second run, like get all the extra hard missile tanks, or sequence break the game. Yeah, the level design is set up for sequence breaking just like the older titles. It's safe to say that the Metroid series is in good hands, and I can only hope that Prime 4 can be just as good as what we have here. This has been the Renegade Master, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace. Hey, post-editing Renegade here. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Just want to let you know that the next video is going to be on Psychonauts, so for anyone who is waiting for that video, that's coming up next. Hopefully it'll be worth the wait. Anyhow, have a nice day, everyone.